Welcome to Hearths of Myths. The fourth day of the month was born in silence, draped in the heavy, mist-laden shadows of Mount Cyllene. The world was not yet awake, the sun of Helios still slumbering beneath the eastern ocean, waiting for the call of the dawn. High in the peaks of Arcadia, where the air was thin and bit with the chill of absolute purity, a cave mouth yawned open like a secret whispered into the earth. Inside, the darkness was not empty. It was pregnant with potential, heavy with the musk of pine needles, damp stone, and the divine scent of ambrosia that clung to the nymph Maya. She lay in the deepest recess of the cavern, away from the prying eyes of the white-armed Hera, away from the judgment of the high court of Olympus. Here, in the quietude of the earth's belly, a god was born. He came into the world not with a cry, but with a gaze. The infant Hermes, slick with the fluids of birth and glowing with a faint, subterranean luminescence, did not weep for the comfort of the womb. His eyes, bright and shifting like pools of quicksilver, snapped open to absorb the gloom of the cave. They were not the eyes of a newborn, unfocused and milky. They were the eyes of an ancient intelligence trapped in soft, new flesh, calculating, measuring, and understanding the geometry of his confinement within moments of his first breath. Maya, exhausted yet radiant with the peculiar sorrow of a mother who knows her child is destined for spaces she cannot occupy, swaddled him in grand, intricate folds of linen, binding his small limbs against his chest, placing him in a winnowing fan that served as a cradle. She kissed his forehead, a touch of cool lips against the burning heat of a new immortal, and turned to rest, believing the babe would sleep as mortal infants do. But sleep was a concept for creatures bound by the sun, and Hermes was born of the dark hours, a creature of the in-between. He lay in the cradle, testing the limits of his physical form. He felt the blood rushing through his veins, a golden ichor that sang with the power of his father, Zeus the cloud-gatherer. The swaddling clothes felt like chains, not comfort. A profound restlessness, an itch beneath the skin that would define his entire existence, seized him. He could not remain static. To be still was to be nothing, and he was, above all else, a force of motion. With a wriggle that defied the clumsiness of infancy, he worked an arm free, then a leg. The linen unraveled like a serpent shedding its skin. Hermes rolled from the cradle, his feet touching the cold stone floor of the cave. He stood. It was a miracle that went unwitnessed by the world. A babe, hours old, standing with the balance of a dancer. He stretched, his joints popping, his form seemingly elongating as the divinity within him pressurized his small frame, demanding growth, demanding agency. He did not grow to full manhood in that instant, but the helplessness of infancy evaporated, replaced by a precocious, terrifying agility. He crept to the mouth of the cave, the threshold of the outer world. The air outside was different, wilder, carrying the scents of distant oceans, wet grass, and sleeping beasts. The sky was turning a bruised purple, the first hint of the coming day. Hermes stepped out, and the soil of Arcadia felt grainy and real beneath his toes. He looked at the horizon, not with wonder, but with a sense of ownership. He was the son of Zeus. This vastness was his inheritance, yet he possessed nothing but the swaddled rags he had left behind. It was then that he saw it, a shape moving through the rich grass near the cave entrance, waddling with a rhythmic, scratching sound. A tortoise. It was a magnificent specimen, its shell a mosaic of tessellated distinctness, black and yellow plates interlocking in a natural shield. It moved with the slow, deliberate arrogance of a creature that fears nothing because it carries its fortress on its back. Hermes paused. A smile, unbidden and sharp, cut across his face. It was the first smile of the trickster, a blend of delight and calculation. He did not see an animal. He saw a mechanism. He saw a future. He crouched low, his divine knees bending in the dew-soaked grass, and addressed the creature with a voice that was high and clear, yet resonated with the authority of the Stormbringer's bloodline. "A lucky sign already," he whispered, the words forming perfectly on his tongue, bypassing the babbling stage of life entirely. "I do not slight you. Hail, shapely one, dancer, companion of the feast. You are welcome to my sight. From where did you get this beautiful toy, this speckled shell that clothes you, a mountain-living tortoise?" The tortoise paused, its head retracting slightly, a primal instinct warning it of the predator standing before it, a predator that looked like a harmless child, but smelled of ozone and danger. Hermes laughed, a sound like water cascading over pebbles. "Nay, you shall not stay here. Being at home is best, for there is danger out of doors. Living, you are a spell against whomever would harm you. But if you were to die, then you would sing most beautifully." The logic was undeniable, a divine paradox that only he could perceive. Alive, the tortoise was merely a silent reptile. Dead, it could become a voice that would charm the gods. With a swiftness that blurred the air, Hermes reached out. His small hands, strong as iron bands, seized the tortoise. He lifted it high, turning it over to examine the pale, vulnerable underbelly. The creature hissed, legs flailing in the void. But Hermes was already moving back into the cave, his mind racing with the blueprint of invention. He sat upon the stone floor, the grey light of dawn filtering in to illuminate his work. He took a knife of grey iron, found among his mother's few possessions, a tool meant for cutting herbs, and with a dispassionate precision, he ended the tortoise's life. It was not an act of cruelty, but of transformation. He scooped out the marrow, the life, the flesh, clearing the shell until it was a hollow, resonating chamber. He worked with a speed that mocked the passage of time. What would take a mortal craftsman days, the infant god accomplished in the beat of a bird's wing. He needed arms for the instrument. He darted out, cut stalks of reed, measuring them by eye, and fixed them across the shell. He stretched oxhide, shrunk by the heat of his will, over the hollow to create a soundboard. He cut bridge pins, drilled holes, and then the final stroke of genius. He took the guts of sheep, twisted and dried, and strung them taut across the frame. 7 strings, 7 voices for the 7 spheres. He held the finished object, the lyre, in his hands. It was ugly in its rawness, a thing of bone and skin and wood, but when he plucked the first string with his plectrum, the sound that emerged was not of this earth. It was a vibration that touched the soul, a resonance that seemed to organize the chaotic air into harmony. Hermes threw his head back and sang. He did not sing of wars or tragedies, for he had seen none. He sang of his own conception, of the love of Zeus and Maia, mocking his own bastard birth with a joyful irreverence, turning the scandal into an epic. He sang of the cave, of the tripod, of the pots and pans in his mother's house. He glorified the mundane, elevating the domestic to the divine. But as the song faded and the vibrations of the lyre died against the cave walls, a new sensation gripped him. The artistic ecstasy receded, replaced by a hollow, gnawing ache in his stomach. Hunger. Not the hunger for milk, which was the food of the helpless, but a craving for meat. Red, roasted, sacrificial meat. The food of the Olympians. The food of status. He looked at the lyre, then placed it reverently in his cradle, covering it with the swaddling clothes to hide it from Maia. The sun was now cresting the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of fire and blood. The day had begun, and with it Hermes's first great ambition. He needed to eat, and to eat well. He needed cattle. And he knew, with the innate knowledge of the divine, who possessed the finest cattle in the world. Apollo, his half-brother, the golden one. Hermes slipped out of the cave once more, this time with a purpose that hardened his features. He did not walk. He flowed. He moved through the shadowed glens of Arcadia, his feet barely touching the bracken. He climbed the peaks, looking north. Pieria. That was where the cattle of the gods grazed, under the shadow of the high mountains. The journey was a blur of landscapes. Hermes moved faster than the wind, for the wind is pushed by pressure, but Hermes was pulled by desire. He crossed the sandy threshold of the isthmus, skirted the holy city of Athens, and plunged into the northern territories. By the time the sun began its descent, casting long, melancholy shadows across the earth, he arrived at the grazing grounds of Pieria. There they were, the immortal cattle of the gods, 50 magnificent beasts, their coats shimmering like polished bronze, their horns tipped with gold, grazing on the sweet, unpolluted clover of the meadow. They were unguarded, or so it seemed, for the sun had set and the herdsmen were drowsy, trusting in the sanctity of the divine property. Hermes watched them from behind a rocky outcrop. His heart beat against his ribs, not with fear, but with the thrill of the transgression. To steal from a god was a crime. To steal from Apollo, the all-seeing, was an art form. He knew he could not simply drive them away. The tracks would lead Apollo straight to the cave of Maya. He needed a ruse. He needed to distort the evidence of reality. He approached the herd, whispering soft, calming words that wove into the wind, lulling the beasts into a trance of obedience. Then he began the work of deception. He moved through the herd, and with a strength that belied his size, he grabbed the cattle one by one and reversed their direction. He did not turn them around. He forced them to walk backward. Their hooves pointed toward the meadow, but their movement was toward Pylos, toward the south. To any tracker, even a divine one, the hoofprints would tell a clear story. The cattle had walked into the meadow, not out of it. But what of his own tracks? The footprints of a god-child would be distinct, unmistakable. Hermes looked at the tamarisk and myrtle bushes growing nearby. He broke off branches, weaving them together with fresh leaves, creating wide, monstrous sandals. Strange wickerwork pads that bore no resemblance to a human foot. He bound them to his feet. When he walked, he left no heel, no toe, only a confused, sweeping blur in the dust, as if a giant wind or a faceless monster had passed. "Come," he whispered to the cattle. "We march to glory." He drove them through the night. The journey back was arduous. He avoided the highways, sticking to the shadows of the forests and the rocky riverbeds. He drove them through the trembling shadows of Onchestus, where the old elder worked his vineyard in the moonlight. Hermes paused, seeing the mortal watching him. "Old man," Hermes called out, his voice deepening to sound like a traveler of indeterminate age. "You see much, but you see nothing. If anyone asks, you were digging your vines. You saw no cattle. You saw no child. Silence brings a harvest of gold. Speech brings a harvest of ruin." The old man, terrified by the glowing eyes of the figure in the dark, nodded mute agreement, and Hermes pressed on. The night was waning. The stars wheeled overhead, the constellations watching the theft in silent judgment. Cyllene, the moon, dipped low, bathing the world in a silver that turned the cattle into ghostly shapes. Hermes drove them relentlessly, pushing them across the river Alpheus, the waters cool and rushing against the cattle's flanks. They arrived at the river bank near Pylos, just as the stars began to fade. The cattle were weary, lowing softly, chewing the lotus and the marsh grass soaked in dew. Hermes knew the time had come. He could not keep them all. The hunger that had driven him from the cradle was now a roaring fire. He needed to consummate the theft with a sacrifice. He selected 2 of the finest cows, beasts with wide foreheads and deep chests. He did not have a weapon, but he was the god of invention. He dragged the beasts away from the herd, wrestling them to the ground with a force that cracked the earth. He rolled them onto their sides, and with a swift, brutal snap of the neck, he ended their lives. It was not the clean cut of a priest's blade, but the raw power of a deity claiming his due. Now, fire. He needed fire, but not the fire of lightning or the fire of the hearth. He needed a fire of his own making. He took a branch of laurel and a piece of pomegranate wood. He held the laurel firm in his palm and spun the pomegranate stick against it, faster and faster, friction building, heat accumulating, until a wisp of smoke curled up. The first fire stick, the first spark born of mortal effort and divine ingenuity. He blew gently, and the flame caught, devouring the dry leaves he had piled. The fire roared. Hermes dragged the carcasses to the flames. He skinned them, the heavy hides peeling back to reveal the rich, marbleized flesh. He quartered the meat, piercing the chunks with wooden spits, roasting them over the open fire. The smell of cooking fat and seared meat rose into the air, a savory pillar of smoke that drifted toward Olympus, a challenge and an offering in one. He spread the meat out on the flat stones by the river. 12 portions. He divided the sacrifice into 12 equal heaps, one for each of the Olympians. He included himself in the count, elevating himself to the pantheon by the act of the ritual. He stood over the steaming piles, the aroma intoxicating him. His stomach cramped with desire. He was an immortal, but he had taken on the form of a child, and the mortal coil screamed for sustenance. He wanted to tear into the flesh, to gorge himself on the fruits of his labor. But he stopped. He stood there, the firelight dancing in his strange, ancient eyes. If he ate, he would be satisfying a mortal hunger. If he ate, he would be admitting that he was merely a child who stole because he was hungry. But he was not a child. He was Hermes. He was a god. And gods do not eat the meat of the sacrifice. They savor the smoke, the essence, the honor, with a sheer exertion of will that exceeded any physical feat he had performed that night. Hermes stepped back. He did not touch the meat. He let the smoke fill his lungs, drawing in the time, the honor of the sacrifice. He feasted on the scent, on the audacity of the act, on the knowledge that he, a day-old babe, had offered a sacrifice to the 12 gods, forcing them to acknowledge him as the 12th. He burned the hooves and the heads, ensuring no trace remained. He threw his wicker sandals into the river, letting the Alpheus carry away the evidence of his trickery. He hid the ashes, covering the blood-soaked earth with fresh sand. The dawn was coming. The rosy fingers of Eos were already brushing the eastern Cyllene. He had to be back. He turned and ran. He flew back to Cyllene, the landscape reversing in a blur. He reached the mountain just as the first true light hit the peaks. He slipped through the keyhole of the cave like an autumn mist, condensing back into his solid form on the other side. He scrambled into his cradle. He grabbed the lyre, tucking it under his left arm. He pulled the swaddling clothes tight around him, shrinking his limbs, softening his features, dimming the intelligence in his eyes until he looked like nothing more than a helpless, milk-fed infant. He lay there, his chest rising and falling in a feigned sleep, the smell of roasted beef still faintly clinging to his breath, the lyre pressing against his ribs like a second heart. He waited. He knew it would not be long. The sun would rise, the theft would be discovered, and the confrontation would begin. But for now, in the silence of the cave, Hermes smiled, a secret smile buried in the folds of the linen. He was the thief of the first dawn, and the game had only just begun. The sun rose over Pieria, not with its usual gentle warmth, but with a searing, inquisitive heat that seemed to scour the earth for secrets. Apollo, the far shooter, the Lord of Light, awoke to a silence that was wrong. The morning air, usually thick with the lowing of his sacred cattle and the soft, rhythmic chewing of cud, was empty. The meadow stood vacant, save for the crushed grass where 50 magnificent beasts had slept the night before. Apollo stood at the edge of the grazing ground, his golden hair catching the light of his own chariot as it began its ascent. His eyes, blue as the hottest part of a flame, scanned the horizon. He was the god of prophecy, the one who knew the will of Zeus. Yet here, in his own domain, a blind spot had been carved out. He moved into the field, his divine senses expanding outward like a net. He found the tracks almost immediately, but what he found stopped him cold. The earth told a lie. The hoofprints were there, clear and deep in the soft mud near the riverbank, but they pointed towards the meadow, not away from it. To the eyes of a mortal, it would appear that a herd had walked into the pasture and simply vanished into the ether. But Apollo was no mortal. He knelt, his fingers brushing the soil. He felt the residual heat of the animals, the faint, fading aura of their life force drifting south. And alongside the backward hoof prints, there were other marks, monstrous, shapeless depressions in the dust, as if a giant had walked on sieves, or as if the trees themselves had uprooted and marched alongside the herd. A fury, cold and brilliant, ignited in his chest. This was not just theft. It was mockery. It was a riddle constructed to humiliate the God of truth. He rose, his form glowing with a terrifying radiance, and began the hunt. He moved with the speed of thought, flying over the landscape, his eyes peeling back the layers of the world. He saw the old man at Onchestus, trembling in his vineyard, and descended upon him like a hawk. The mortal, withered and terrified by the sudden manifestation of divine wrath, spilled his story. A child, a strange, glowing babe, driving a herd backward, wielding a whip of braided darkness. A child. The word hung in Apollo's mind, absurd and impossible. A child born yesterday? A child with the strength to wrestle 50 oxen and the cunning to reverse their tracks? The trail led him across the sandy expanse of Pylos, past the smoking remains of a sacrifice that smelled suspiciously of his own livestock, and finally, inevitably, to the mist-shrouded peaks of Cyllene. The mountain seemed to recoil from his approach, the shadows deepening as if trying to hide the crime. But Apollo was the sun. Shadows were merely places he had not yet looked. He reached the cave mouth. The air inside was cool and smelled of juniper and old stone. He stepped across the threshold, and the darkness fled before him. The cave was illuminated in harsh, unforgiving detail. There, in the far corner, lay a cradle, and in that cradle lay a baby, wrapped tight in swaddling clothes, clutching a tortoise shell to his chest, as a mortal child might clutch a doll. Apollo strode forward, his footsteps echoing like thunder in the confined space. He loomed over the cradle, his shadow falling across the infant. Hermes lay there, his eyes squeezed shut, his breath coming in soft, feigned rhythms of sleep. He looked indistinguishable from any human newborn, helpless, fragile, innocent. But Apollo saw the tension in the small eyelids, the subtle twitch of a hand that was ready to grab or strike. "Up, you little menace!" Apollo's voice boomed, shaking dust from the cavern ceiling. "Up from your cradle, you builder of snares! Tell me where my cattle are, or I will hurl you into the black pit of Tartarus, where the light never reaches, and your trickery will rot in the dark." Hermes opened one eye. It was a bright, glittering eye, devoid of fear. He yawned, a theatrical, wide-mouthed yawn that displayed his toothless gums. He sat up, rubbing his face with his small fists, and looked at the towering god with an expression of utter bewilderment. "Why do you speak to me of cattle, son of Leto?" Hermes asked, his voice a piping treble, innocent as a lamb. "I am a child of yesterday. My feet are soft. The ground is rough. I care for sleep and warm baths and my mother's milk. I do not know what a cow is. I have only heard the word. Do I look like a cattle rustler? I'm a baby. I cannot even walk without stumbling." Apollo stared at him. incredulous. The audacity was breathtaking. The child was lying to the God of truth, and he was doing it with a smile that suggested he expected to be believed. Apollo reached down, his hand glowing with heat, and grabbed the infant by the arm. He lifted Hermes effortlessly into the air. "You speak well for a newborn," Apollo snarled. "Too well. Your words are slippery as oil, but I smell the blood of my oxen on your breath. You will come with me. We will let the Father judge this madness." He did not wait for Maya to protest. He tucked the struggling infant under his arm like a sack of grain and shot into the sky. The ascent to Olympus was a blur of wind and light. Hermes, dangling from Apollo's grip, watched the world shrink below him. He did not cry out. Instead, he observed the architecture of the heavens, calculating the distance, the wind shear, the pathways of the clouds. Even as a prisoner, he was mapping the terrain of his future kingdom. They arrived at the golden gates of Olympus, the home of the deathless gods. The hall of Zeus was vast, a chamber of clouds and lightning, where the air hummed with the power of the cosmos. The other Olympians were gathered, sensing the disturbance. Zeus sat on his high throne, his beard thick and dark, his eyes holding the weight of the universe. He watched as his son, the radiant Apollo, marched in, dragging a swaddled infant who looked entirely out of place among the splendor of the divine court. Apollo threw Hermes down at the feet of Zeus. The infant landed on his feet, composed and alert, adjusting his swaddling clothes with dignity. "Father," Apollo began, his voice trembling with suppressed rage, "I bring you a prodigy, a thief born of the night. He has stolen my sacred herd, driven them backward to confuse me, and slaughtered 2 of my finest beasts. And he stands here, hours old, and denies it to my face." Zeus looked down at the child. He saw the resemblance, the spark of his own fire in the boy's eyes. He saw the cunning, the potential, the sheer undeniable life force that radiated from the small frame. He did not frown. A smile, hidden beneath his beard, twitched at the corners of his mouth. "Well, child," Zeus rumbled, his voice like the shifting of tectonic plates. "What say you to these charges?" Hermes stepped forward. He did not grovel. He bowed, not as a subject, but as a younger prince acknowledging a king. "Father Zeus," Hermes said, his voice ringing clear in the great hall, "I am a truthful child. I do not know how to lie. This person," he gestured vaguely at Apollo, "came to my house, threatened me, and dragged me here. He accuses me of stealing cows. Look at me. I am a baby. I was born yesterday. Do I have the strength to lift an ox? Do I have the legs to run across the world? He is the one who is confused. He found no witnesses. He brings no proof. He bullies a helpless infant because he lost his pets. He paused, and then, with a timing that no tutor could have taught, he looked up at Zeus and winked. It was a small gesture, but it shattered the tension of the court. Zeus threw his head back and laughed. It was a roar that shook the pillars of Olympus, a joyous, thunderous sound that acknowledged the absurdity and the brilliance of the situation. He knew the child was lying. Everyone knew. But the lie was so magnificent, so perfectly constructed, that it became a form of art. "Enough," Zeus said, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "You are a knave, my son, and a liar, but a charming one. But order must be kept. You will return the cattle to Apollo. You will show him where you hid them. No more tricks. The balance must be restored." Hermes bowed again, accepting the verdict. He had not been punished. He had been recognized. He had stood trial before the King of Gods and walked away with a smile. The descent back to Earth was less violent. Apollo, still simmering with resentment but bound by the decree of Zeus, followed Hermes back to Pylos. They reached the riverbank where the 2 slaughtered cows lay, their bones now bare, the meat long since consumed by the fire or the earth. Apollo saw the hides stretched out on the rock. The reality of the loss hit him again. These were immortal beasts, creatures of grace, reduced to butcher's scraps. His hand went to the silver bow at his shoulder. He turned to Hermes, his face darkening, ready to exact a penalty that Zeus had omitted. "You killed them," Apollo whispered, the air around him heating up, the grass beginning to smoke. "You slaughtered my sacred cattle." Hermes saw the shift. The game had turned dangerous again. Words would not save him now. The anger of Apollo was a physical force, a radiation that could wither a minor god to ash. He needed something stronger than rhetoric. He needed magic. Slowly, deliberately, Hermes reached into his swaddling clothes and pulled out the tortoise shell. The lyre. He sat on a rock, the river rushing behind him, and settled the instrument on his knee. Apollo watched, confused by the object. It looked like garbage, a dead reptile and some sheep guts. Then Hermes struck the first chord. The sound that emerged was not merely a noise, it was a restructuring of the atmosphere. The notes were clear, piercing, and achingly sweet. They carried the memory of the wind in the reeds, the rhythm of the ocean, the silence of the stars. Hermes began to play in earnest. His small fingers danced over the 7 strings, weaving a melody that bypassed the mind and went straight to the heart. He sang. He did not sing of himself this time. He sang of the gods. He sang of the birth of the Olympians, of the Titans, of the division of the earth and sky. He sang of Apollo. He sang of the sun god's glory, of his golden arrows, of his healing hands, of his mother Leto and her suffering. He painted a portrait of Apollo in sound, elevating his brother to a height of majesty that even Apollo had never fully conceived. The transformation in the sun god was instantaneous. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated wonder. His hand dropped from his bow. His mouth parted slightly. The music seemed to stroke his very soul, soothing the savage heat of his wrath, replacing it with a profound, melancholic longing. He had never heard music before, not like this. The birds sang, the wind whistled, but this was the voice of the universe, organized and made audible. Hermes played on, watching his brother through half-closed eyes. He saw the desire. He saw the hunger. It was the same hunger Hermes had felt for the meat, but purified, spiritualized. The song ended. The final note hung in the air, vibrating in the silence of the meadow. Apollo stood frozen for a long moment. Then he stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the lyre. "What is this?" he asked, his voice hushed, reverent. "What is this art? What is this cure for sorrow? I have walked the earth for eons. I have heard the muses on Olympus, but I have never heard a sound like this. It is worth more than 50 cattle. It is worth more than gold." Hermes smiled, stroking the tortoise shell. "It is a toy," he said casually. "A trifle I made to pass the time. But if you like it, brother, perhaps we can come to an arrangement." Apollo knelt before him. The dynamic had shifted completely. The judge was now the supplicant. "Give it to me," Apollo said. "I must have it. I will give you the cattle. Keep them, all of them. Just give me the song." "The cattle are a fair start," Hermes said, his mind calculating rapidly. "But I am a herdsman now. I need authority. I need a symbol." "I will give you the whip of the herdsman," Apollo promised, eager, desperate. "I will make you the lord of all flocks and herds. I will make you the messenger to the underworld, the only one who can cross the boundaries of life and death without penalty. And I will give you this." Apollo reached into his tunic and pulled out a wand of gold, 3-leafed, glowing with a protective aura, the caduceus. "This wand creates peace. It wards off death. It brings wealth. Take it. It is yours, and with it, I swear by the river Styx, the unbreakable oath of the gods, that I will never harm you, that I will hold you as my dearest brother, my confidant, my other half." Hermes looked at the cattle, grazing peacefully in the distance. He looked at the golden wand, the symbol of his new power. He looked at Apollo, whose face was open, vulnerable with the love of the music. He held out the lyre. "Done," Hermes said. Apollo took the instrument. His hands trembled slightly as he touched the strings. He plucked a note, and a look of ecstasy washed over him. He was no longer just the god of the sun. He was now the god of music, of poetry, of the arts. The void in his spirit had been filled. Hermes stood up, grasping the caduceus. He felt the power of the wand humming against his palm. He was no longer a thief hiding in a cave. He was an Olympian. He had traded a dead tortoise for a kingdom. He had traded a song for a brotherhood. The two gods stood together by the river, the sun and the shadow, the truth and the trickster, finally in balance. Apollo played, and Hermes listened, already planning his next invention, his next journey, his next move in the great game of existence. The trial was over. The partnership had begun. The cattle grazed on, unaware that they had just purchased the birth of music and the rise of the messenger god. The laughter of the lyre had faded into the annals of divine history, replaced by a sullen, heavy silence that hung over the peaks of Olympus like a shroud of lead. The golden age of reconciliation between the brothers was over, replaced by the domestic Cold War that defined the reign of Zeus. It was a time of whispers, of averted gazes, and of secrets that festered in the ichor of the gods. The King of Heaven sat upon his throne, his brow clouded not by the storms of the earth, but by the storm within his own house. Hera, the queen of the gods, the white-armed guardian of marriage, was in a fury that made the foundations of the world tremble. Her jealousy was not a sudden flare, but a glacial crushing force. And this time, its target was a mortal priestess named Io. Hermes, now fully established in his role as the messenger, the Psychopomp, and the herald, moved through the palace with the silent grace of a shadow detached from its caster. He saw the tension in the air. He saw the way the other gods, Ares with his bloody spear, Athena with her grey eyes of judgment, steered clear of the royal couple. Zeus had tried to hide his infidelity, wrapping the earth in a thick, unnatural cloud to conceal his tryst with Io, the daughter of Inachus. But Hera, whose eyes were sharp as diamond shards, had seen the sudden darkness at noon and known, with the instinct of a betrayed wife, that her husband was at play. She had descended, blown away the mist, and found Zeus standing innocently beside a beautiful snow-white heifer. Zeus had sworn the beast was born of the earth, a lie so transparent it insulted the dignity of the cosmos. Hera, smiling a smile that promised eternal suffering, had asked for the cow as a gift, and Zeus, trapped by his own deceit, had been forced to give her up. Now, Io was gone. Not dead, but worse. She was a prisoner in the grove of Mycenae, guarded by a creature that was the very embodiment of paranoia. Argus Panoptes, Argus of the all-seeing eyes, a giant of the ancient earth, a relic of a time when monsters walked freely, possessing a strength that could crush boulders and a vigilance that was biologically impossible to evade. Hermes knew the summons was coming before the thunder rolled. He felt the pull of his father's will, a magnetic drag on his spirit. He slipped into the throne room. The caduceus, the golden wand of sleep and waking, resting lightly in his hand. Zeus was alone, staring into a scrying pool that showed the suffering of the white heifer, wandering in misery, starving, cut off from her humanity. "My son," Zeus said, his voice low, lacking its usual boom. It was the voice of a king who had lost a pawn and could not admit it. "You are the cleverest of us. You are the one who can walk through walls, who can steal the thought from a man's mind before he speaks it. I have a task for you, a task that requires not the thunderbolt, but the knife." Hermes approached the throne. He did not smile. The playfulness of the cattle thief was gone, replaced by the cold, professional demeanor of the executioner. "Command me, father." "Io suffers," Zeus said, gesturing to the image in the water. "Hera has set a watchdog over her. Argus. He never sleeps. He has 100 eyes, scattered across his head like stars in the night sky. They rest in shifts. 2 sleep, 98 watch. He sees the wind move. He sees the grass grow. He sees the intent of a predator before the muscle twitches. You must free her." "To free her is to take him," Hermes said, his mind already calculating the angles. "Argus is strong. He slew the echidna. He is not a beast to be wrestled." "I do not ask you to wrestle him," Zeus said, his eyes hardening. "I ask you to end him. Go down to the pastures of Nemea. Use your craft. Use your wand. Use your voice. Lull him. Bind him in the chains of slumber. And when the last eye closes, strike. Bring his darkness to the light." It was a command of assassination. A wet work job. The first of its kind for the young god. Hermes bowed, his face a mask of obedience. He turned and left the hall, the weight of the mission settling on his shoulders like a cloak of iron. He was not going as a herald this time. He was going as a killer. He retired to his own quarters to prepare. He shed his divine radiance, damping down the glow of his skin until he looked like a common mortal. He put on the chlamys, the traveler's cloak, pinning it at his shoulder. On his head, he placed the petassos, the wide-brimmed traveler's hat, pulling it low to shade his eyes. On his feet, he strapped the talaria, the winged sandals of imperishable gold, capable of carrying him over the wet sea and the boundless earth with the speed of the wind. But the most important tool was the weapon. He did not take a spear or a bow. He took the harp. It was a sickle sword, a blade of grey adamant, curved like the crescent moon with a jagged, serrated inner edge. It was a tool of harvest, but in the hands of a god, it was a tool of reaping lives. He tucked the harp into his belt, hidden beneath the folds of his tunic. In his left hand, he took the caduceus. In his right, he carried a set of reed pipes, the syrinx, fashioned from the river plants, a rustic instrument for a rustic disguise. He launched himself from the precipice of Olympus. The descent was a controlled fall through the layers of the atmosphere. He pierced the clouds, the air rushing past him, cold and bracing. Below, the geography of Greece spread out like a wrinkled map, the silver thread of the Alpheus, the dark forests of Arcadia, and the sun-baked plains of the Argolid. He landed in the groves near Nemea, his feet touching the earth with the lightness of a falling leaf. The air here was thick with heat and the buzzing of insects. It smelled of dry grass, olive wood, and the musk of cattle. Hermes shifted his form, shrinking slightly, hunching his shoulders, adopting the gait of a shepherd who had spent too many years walking the rocky hills. He put the pipes to his lips and began to play a low, wandering melody, a tune that mimicked the wind in the trees. He saw them almost immediately. In the center of a lush green meadow, tethered to an olive tree, was the white heifer, Io. She looked at him with large, liquid eyes that retained a terrifying humanity trapped within the bovine skull. She lowed, a sound of utter despair, recognizing the divine aura beneath the shepherd's rags, but unable to speak, unable to beg. Her sides were gaunt, her white hide marred by the dust of her captivity. And guarding her sat the monster. Argus Panoptes was a titan of flesh and muscle, a creature of primal earth. He sat on a large rock, his massive frame blocking the sun. But it was his head that drew the horror. It was a citadel of vision. His face, his forehead, the back of his skull, they were covered in eyes, 100 of them. Some were blue, some brown, some green, some the color of gold. They blinked in a chaotic, rhythmic discord. As Hermes approached, he saw the mechanism of the giant's vigilance. 12 eyes were closed, heavy with sleep. But 80 or more were wide open, swiveling, focusing, dissecting the world with a paranoid intensity. The giant turned his head. 50 eyes locked onto Hermes. The gaze was physical, a pressure on the skin. It was like walking into a wall of light. "Who goes there?" Argus rumbled. His voice was like grinding stones, deep and suspicious. "Keep your distance, goatherd. This pasture is forbidden." Hermes did not stop. He strolled forward, the picture of rustic nonchalance, playing a trill on his pipes. He stopped a respectful distance away, leaning on a crook he had conjured from the air. "Greetings, mighty one," Hermes said, his voice rougher, tinged with the dialect of the hills. "I seek no pasture. My goats are resting in the shade of the cliff. I heard the wind, and I thought I would add my own breath to it. It is a lonely day, and music is the only company that does not ask for water." Argus watched him. The eyes that were awake narrowed. He scanned the shepherd for weapons, for threats. He saw only a boy with a hat and a pipe. The music, however, was pleasant. It was simple, repetitive, weaving a hypnotic pattern that tugged at the mind. The giant had been sitting for days, weeks, months, watching the cow. Boredom was his only enemy, and boredom is the gateway to sleep. "You play well," Argus grunted, shifting his weight. "Come, sit on this stone, but do not come too close to the heifer. She is special property of the queen." Hermes sat. He was close enough now to smell the giant, a scent of sweat, earth, and the ozone of constant alertness. He continued to play. The melody changed, becoming slower, deeper. He channeled the power of the caduceus through the music, weaving a spell of lethargy into the notes. "The sun is hot," Hermes murmured between songs. "It weighs on the eyelids, does it not? Even the earth sleeps at noon. Look at the shadows stretching out. They are the blankets of the world." Argus blinked. A few more eyes fluttered closed. "I do not sleep," the giant said, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "I watch. It is my purpose. The great queen commanded it." "A noble purpose," Hermes agreed. "But even the stars set, my friend. Even the sun dips below the ocean. Tell me, do you know the story of this instrument? These pipes? They were not always reeds. They were once a nymph." "A nymph?" Argus asked. The story tempted him. Narrative is a trap. It requires the listener to surrender, to imagine, to drift away from the present moment. "Her name was Syrinx," Hermes began, his voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of a storyteller. He kept his eyes on the giant, watching the blinking lids. "She was a naiad of the mountains, beloved by the satyrs. But she scorned them all. She was a follower of Artemis, chaste and swift. But then Pan saw her. Pan, the goat-footed, the lord of the wild. He saw her, and he wanted her." Hermes spun the tale out, lengthening the descriptions, adding details about the light on the water, the rustle of the leaves, the desperate breath of the running nymph. He made his voice a drone, a comforting, monotonous hum that mimicked the sound of bees in the afternoon heat. "She ran to the river Ladon," Hermes whispered. She begged her sisters, the water nymphs, to change her, to save her. And just as Pan reached out to grab her, his hands closed on nothing but reeds. Marsh reeds, whispering in the wind. And he sighed, and his breath moving through the reeds made a mournful sound. This sound. Hermes played a long, melancholy note on the pipes. It was a sound of pure loss, of heavy, irresistible sadness. Argus listened. The story had done its work. The giant's head grew heavy. The sheer mental effort of keeping 100 distinct visual streams active was faltering. The music was a soothing balm, smoothing over the jagged edges of his paranoia. One by one, the eyes began to close. It was like watching the lights go out in a city. First, the eyes on the back of his head, then the ones on his cheeks. The lids drooped, heavy with the divine weight of Hermes' spell. The giant fought it. He shook his head, a dozen eyes snapping open in alarm, but Hermes was ready. He deepened the music, adding a thrumming vibration that resonated with the giant's heartbeat, slowing it down. "Rest," Hermes whispered. "The cow is safe. The queen is watching from high above. The earth is safe. Close your eyes, watcher. The dream is better than the sight." Argus let out a long, shuddering sigh. His chin dropped to his chest. The last few stubborn eyes, the golden ones in the center of his forehead, struggled. They fixed on Hermes, trying to pierce the disguise, trying to see the god beneath the shepherd. But the image was blurring. The music was a fog. They closed. Silence descended on the grove. It was absolute. The only sound was the deep, rhythmic snoring of the giant, a sound like the ocean crashing in a cave. Hermes stopped playing. He sat perfectly still for a count of 10, watching. Not a single lid twitched. The giant was under. The sleep of the gods, deep as death, held him fast. Hermes stood up. The transformation was instant. The shepherd vanished. The god appeared. He grew in stature, the divine radiance returning in a cold, terrible flash. He drew the harp from his belt. The adamant blade caught the sunlight, gleaming with a cruel, surgical promise. He stepped up to the sleeping giant. He did not hesitate. There was no malice in his heart, only the cold necessity of the mission. Argus was an obstacle. Obstacles were to be removed. Hermes raised the sword. He looked at the neck of the giant, a thick column of muscle and vein that supported the citadel of eyes. "Sleep well, Panoptes," Hermes whispered. "Your watch is ended." The blade came down. It was a single, sweeping motion, powered by the strength of an Olympian. The adamant sheared through flesh, bone, and gristle with terrifying ease. The head of Argus, with its 100 sleeping eyes, rolled from his shoulders, thudding heavily onto the grass. The body convulsed once, a massive, seismic shudder, and then lay still. The blood, dark and rich, soaked into the earth of Nemea, feeding the roots of the olive tree. Hermes stood over the corpse, the harper dripping in his hand. He felt the shift in the cosmos. The title settled on him then, a heavy, dark laurel wreath. Argifontes, the slayer of Argus. He had taken a life to save a life. He had crossed the line from trickster to warrior. But the silence was short-lived. A scream tore through the sky. Not a human scream, but the shriek of a goddess. High above, The clouds boiled and turned black. Hera had seen. The Queen of Heaven descended, her chariot drawn by peacocks, her face a mask of grief and apocalyptic rage. Hermes did not stay to fight her. His mission was the rescue, not the war. He grabbed the tether of the white heifer. "Run!" he commanded Io, tapping her flank with the caduceus to give her strength. "Go to the sea. Run until the curse is lifted." Io bolted, terrified by the blood and the thunder. She ran toward the Ionian Sea, her torment far from over. For Hera would send a gadfly to sting her across the world, but she was free of the eyes. Hermes launched himself into the air, his winged sandals beating furiously against the wind. He looked back once. He saw Hera land in the grove. He saw her kneel beside the severed head of her faithful servant. He watched as she gathered the 100 eyes, plucking them from the dead flesh with tender, trembling hands. She cast them onto the tail feathers of her sacred bird, the peacock, so that Argus would watch forever, beautiful and terrible, 1,000 eyes opening in the fan of the bird's plumage. The slayer of Argus turned away, ascending toward the safety of the upper air. His hands were stained with blood, but his conscience was clear. He had done the will of Zeus. He had proven that the wand was mightier than the sword, and that the cleverest way to win a fight was to ensure the enemy never saw the blow coming. He was the messenger of death now, too, and the silence of the 100 eyes was his first trophy. The blood of Argus had long since washed into the earth, feeding the roots of the olive trees until they bore fruit as dark as bruised eyes. But Hermes did not linger in the shadow of his violence. He was a god of motion, of transitions, and the stagnation of guilt was a weight he refused to carry. He had shed the skin of the assassin as easily as he had shed the swaddling clothes of his infancy. Now, a different hunger seized him. Not the craving for meat that had driven him to steal the cattle of the sun, nor the cold, dutiful resolve that had guided his hand against the watchman of Hera. This was a hunger for life, for connection, for the chaotic, messy, vibrant act of creation. He was the lord of the road, but he was also the lord of the flocks. He was the Nomaios, the shepherd god, the one who presided over the teeming fertility of the beast and the soil. The high, sterile air of Olympus, with its marble halls and rigid hierarchies, often suffocated him. He craved the musk of the earth, the smell of wet wool, the heat of animal breath, and the wild, unbridled passions that flourished in the hidden valleys of Arcadia. He was a bachelor god, yes. He had no queen, no Hera to his Zeus, no Persephone to his Hades. He was too quick, too mercurial to be bound by the heavy chains of a single marriage. But he was not alone. He was the sower of seeds, the scatterer of potential, the father of anomalies. His first conquest was not of the earth, but of the very summit of desire. Aphrodite, the golden one, the goddess who could bring Zeus to his knees with a flutter of her eyelashes. She was the antithesis of Hermes in many ways. She was pure, overwhelming presence, a force of attraction that pulled the universe toward her center. He was the force of deflection, of movement, of the glance that darts away. Yet he desired her. He watched her across the banquet tables of the gods, his quicksilver eyes tracing the curve of her neck, the impossible geometry of her perfection. But Aphrodite, vain and besieged by the adoration of every male deity, had laughed at him. She saw him as a boy, a trickster, a servant of her father. She did not see the dangerous, potent masculinity that lay beneath the winged sandals. Hermes did not despair. Despair is for those who accept reality as it is presented to them. Hermes accepted nothing that he could not steal or alter. If he could not win her with strength like Ares, or with kingly authority like Poseidon, he would win her with the one thing she could not defend against: opportunity. He watched. He waited. He became the invisible breath in her chamber. And when the moment came, a moment of vulnerability, a stolen sandal, a misplaced girdle, a favor called in from Zeus, who owed him for the Argus affair, Hermes struck. It was not a seduction of whispers and poetry. It was a seduction of wit. He made her laugh. He surprised her. He showed her a reflection of herself in the mirror of his own cleverness that she had never seen before. He did not worship her. He engaged her. And for a brief, fiery eternity, the goddess of love lay with the god of luck. The result of that union was a child of breathtaking contradiction. Hermaphroditus. When Hermes held the babe, he saw the perfect fusion of the parents. The child possessed the terrible, blinding beauty of Aphrodite and the lithe, athletic grace of Hermes. He was a creature of duality, a boy who carried the promise of both genders within his soul, long before the waters of Salmachus would physically merge him with the nymph. Hermes looked at his son and saw the ultimate trick, a being who refused to be one thing, a being who straddled the line between the binary forces of the world. He kissed the child's forehead, bestowing upon him the blessing of fluidity, and released him into the world of nymphs to be raised, knowing that beauty, true beauty, is always a little dangerous. But the palaces of the gods were too refined for the itch that now plagued Hermes. He descended. He went back to the roots, to the wild hills of Arcadia, where the air was thick with pollen and the sound of panpipes. He roamed the woodlands, not as a god, but as a shepherd, a rough-hewn figure with a crook in his hand and the dust of the road on his tunic. It was here, in the shadow of the mountains, that he saw her, the daughter of Dryops, a mortal woman or perhaps a nymph of the oak trees. Her lineage was as tangled as the undergrowth she walked through. She was not the polished, marble-perfect beauty of Aphrodite. She was wild. Her hair was a tangle of dark vines. Her skin smelled of rain and crushed berries, and her laughter was like the sound of a rushing creek. She tended her father's flocks with a fierce, protective grace that stirred the pastoral heart of the god. Hermes did not approach her with the golden wand. He approached her with the sweat of labor. He worked beside her. He herded the sheep, his divine will ensuring that the ewes lambed twins, that the wolves stayed at bay, that the grass grew thick and sweet. He courted her in the language of the hills, with gifts of honeycomb, with carved wooden bowls, with songs sung into the hollow of the night. And she, seeing the strange fire in the eyes of this shepherd, who moved too fast and knew too much, opened her arms to him. Their union was primal. It was a crashing together of the divine spark and the earthly vessel. It was a storm in the valley, a coupling that shook the leaves from the trees. And from this union, from this mixing of the high ether and the deep soil, a child was conceived. The pregnancy was short, accelerated by the divine blood. When the time came, the nurse, a woman of the village, superstitious and fearful, attended the birth. Hermes stood outside the hut, pacing, the nervous energy radiating off him in waves that made the birds fall silent. He heard the cry of the mother, the grunt of effort, and then a silence. A silence that was broken not by the wail of a human infant, but by a bleat, a strange, rasping, animalistic sound. Then, a scream. The nurse burst from the hut, her face pale as ash, her eyes wide with a terror that transcended simple fear. "A monster!" she shrieked, fleeing into the woods. "She has borne a demon!" Hermes did not flinch. He stepped into the hut. The mother lay exhausted, turning her head away from the bundle at her feet, repulsed by what had come out of her. Hermes approached the cradle. He looked down. There, kicking in the swaddling clothes, was his son. He was not beautiful in the way Hermaphroditus was beautiful. He was a riot of biology. From the waist down, he was a goat, with shaggy, rough legs and cloven hooves that kicked at the air. From the waist up he was a man, but his chest was covered in a thick mat of hair. His face was wrinkled and red, wreathed in a beard that no infant should possess. And on his forehead, pushing through the skin, were 2 horns. Hermes stared at the child. The child stared back. The infant's eyes were not the milky eyes of a human, nor the calm eyes of a god. They were the horizontal, rectangular pupils of a goat, filled with a manic, irrepressible merriment. The baby reached up with a hairy hand, grabbed Hermes's beard, and laughed. It was a deep, throaty chuckle that sounded like rocks tumbling down a hill. Hermes felt a surge of emotion that nearly knocked him to his knees. It was not revulsion. It was delight. Pure, unadulterated delight. He saw the genius of the design. This was not a failed human. This was the perfect embodiment of the wild. This was the spirit of the panic, the lust, the hunger, the music of the earth made flesh. "You are perfect," Hermes whispered, scooping the hairy, horned thing into his arms. "You are the all. You are everything the city is not." The mother would not hold him. The village would stone him. Hermes knew this. He could not leave his son here. He looked around the hut for something to carry him in. He saw the skin of a hare, a mountain jackrabbit, drying by the fire. He grabbed it, wrapping the soft fur around the boy's goat legs, swaddling him in the pelt of the swiftest creature of the field. "Come," Hermes said, his face glowing with a father's pride. "We go to the high house. We go to show them what the earth can do." He launched himself into the sky. The ascent to Olympus was a procession of two. Hermes, the golden herald, carrying the goat god, the monstrous babe. When he entered the throne room of Zeus, the gods were gathered for the ambrosia hour. They turned, expecting news of a war or a treaty. Instead, they saw Hermes, grinning like a madman, holding out a bundle of rabbit fur. "Behold," Hermes announced, his voice ringing with joy. "My son." He pulled back the fur. For a second, there was silence. Hera's lip curled. Athena frowned, analyzing the hybrid anatomy. But then, the child laughed. He kicked his hooves and let out a joyous, bleating cry that echoed off the marble pillars. Dionysus was the first to react. The god of wine, the other outsider, the other madness bringer, roared with laughter. He stood up, spilling his cup, and clapped his hands. "Look at him!" Dionysus shouted. "He is the spirit of the revel. He is the dance." And then the impossible happened. The joy was contagious. Zeus smiled. Apollo chuckled. Even the grim Ares found a smirk touching his lips. The child's ugliness was so profound, so energetic, so completely devoid of shame, that it charmed them all. He was a mascot of the untamed, a reminder that outside their ordered palaces, the world was still wild and woolly. "He delights all our hearts," Zeus proclaimed, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. "We shall call him Pan, for he is all to us." Hermes held Pan high, the goat boy basking in the applause of the immortals. In that moment, Hermes was not just a messenger. He was the bridge between the grotesque and the divine. He had proven that holiness was not just in symmetry and light, but in the muddy, hairy, horned vitality of existence. Pan would go on to rule the wilds, to chase nymphs, to incite panic in armies, to play the pipes that would rival Apollo's lyre. But to Hermes, he would always be the greatest joke he ever told, and the one he loved the most. But Hermes's loins were not done with the world. There was a darker side to his nature, a side that loved the shadow as much as the light. If Pan was the noise of the wild, Hermes needed a son who was the silence of the night. He turned his gaze to Chione, the daughter of Daedalion. She was a beauty of the north, cold and sharp as the winter wind. She had many suitors, but Hermes did not court her with flowers. He courted her with a spell. He touched her with the caduceus, putting her into a deep slumber, and visited her in the dreamscape, sowing a seed that was made of smoke and mirrors. From this union came Autolycus. Hermes watched Autolycus grow, not with the indulgent joy he felt for Pan, but with the critical eye of a master craftsman training an apprentice. Autolycus did not have horns or goat legs. He looked like a man, but he had the hands of his father, hands that could untie any knot, pick any lock, and move faster than the eye could follow. Hermes took the boy to the crossroads at midnight. He taught him the secrets that were too dangerous for the daylight. "Listen to me, my son," Hermes whispered, his voice blending with the rustle of the cypress trees. "The world is full of walls. Men build them to keep things in. They build fences for their cattle, chests for their gold, and laws for their minds. They believe that if they lock something away, it is theirs." Autolycus looked up, his eyes gleaming with a predatory intelligence. "And is it not? Nothing belongs to anyone," Hermes said, a dark grin spreading across his face. "Ownership is a myth, a story men tell themselves to feel safe. The only truth is the hand. If you can hold it, it is yours. If you can take it without being seen, it was never theirs to begin with." He taught Autolycus the art of the oath that is not an oath. How to swear by the gods in a way that sounded binding, but contained a hidden loophole. He taught him how to change the color of a horse's coat with a mixture of herbs and ash, so that a stolen beast could be sold back to its owner the next day. He taught him the walk of the ghost, how to step so that no twig snapped, how to breathe so that the air was not disturbed. "You are the wolf," Hermes told him. "You are the lone one. You will be the grandfather of kings, but you will never be a king yourself. Kings sit on thrones and become fat. You will roam the edges. You will be the testing stone against which other men break." And Autolycus learned well. He became the prince of thieves, the man who could steal the helmet from a warrior's head while he was wearing it. He was the darker reflection of Hermes's own youth, the cattle raid writ large across a human lifetime. Through Autolycus, Hermes wove his thread into the tapestry of the great heroes, for Autolycus would father Anticlea, who would bear Odysseus. The cunning, the survival instinct, the ability to lie with a straight face. It all flowed from the blood of Hermes, cascading down the generations like a hidden river. Hermes stood on the peak of Cyllene, looking out over the world. He saw Pan dancing in the glens, his pipes echoing through the valleys, driving the Maenads into ecstasy. He saw Autolycus in the shadows of a merchant's camp, his fingers closing around a pouch of gold. He saw Hermaphroditus gazing into a pool, lost in the mystery of his own reflection. He was the father of them all, the monster, the thief, the beauty. He was the god of the unintended consequence, the deity of the marginalized and the strange. The other Olympians demanded perfection, perfect temples, perfect sacrifices, perfect order. Hermes demanded nothing but life. He was the bacteria in the wound, the weed in the crack of the pavement, the sudden, inexplicable urge to run away. The sun began to set, casting long purple shadows across the world. The time of the day was ending, and the time of the dream was beginning. Hermes adjusted his winged sandals. He had one more role to play before the night was done. The mortals were laying their heads down on their pillows. They were closing their eyes, surrendering to the little death of sleep. They needed a guide. He raised his wand. He was the Oneiropompos, the conductor of dreams. He would sift through the desires and fears of humanity, sending false dreams through the gate of ivory and true dreams through the gate of horn. He would whisper inspiration to the poet and warning to the king. He was the father of flocks, yes, but the greatest flock of all was the teeming, silent, invisible herd of human dreams, and he alone knew how to shepherd them through the dark. He leaped from the mountain, diving into the twilight, a golden spark descending into the collective unconscious of the world. The day was for Apollo, but the night, with all its terrors and its possibilities, belonged to Hermes. The age of bronze was waning, its harsh, metallic echoes fading into the age of heroes. This was a time when the boundaries between God and mortal were not walls, but permeable membranes. The Olympians did not merely watch, they interfered. They walked the earth in disguise, sowed seeds of discord and glory, and demanded impossible feats from flesh and blood. And in this grand, chaotic theater, Hermes was the stage manager. He was the invisible hand, the divine loophole that allowed humanity to survive the crushing weight of destiny. While Ares thundered on the battlefield and Poseidon shook the earth, Hermes operated in the quiet spaces, the moment of hesitation before a decision, the sudden inspiration that solves a riddle, the glint of a tool hidden in a shadowed corner. He was the patron of the impossible task, the god who whispered, "There is a way," when all roads seemed blocked. His first great intervention came in the form of a young man with nothing but a name and a death sentence. Perseus, the son of Danae and the golden reign of Zeus. He stood on the shores of Seriphos, a pawn in the cruel game of King Polydectes, tasked with bringing back the head of Medusa. It was a suicide mission. Medusa was not a monster one fought. She was a monster one became. To look at her was to cease to be biology and become geology, stone. Hermes watched Perseus from the cliffs, invisible in the sea mist. He saw the despair in the boy's eyes, the way he clutched his sword with a hand that trembled not from fear, but from the overwhelming futility of his quest. The other gods, Athena, Hades, had interests in this, but they were distant, strategic. Hermes felt a kinship. Perseus was a trickster in the making, a hero who needed wit as much as strength. He descended. He did not come in thunder. He appeared as a young man, a traveler with a quick smile and eyes that held the spark of mischief. He walked up to Perseus, who was staring at the horizon, contemplating his doom. "A heavy burden for young shoulders," Hermes said, leaning against a rock. "The Gorgon is not a goat to be herded." Perseus turned, startled. "Who are you?" "A friend of the road," Hermes replied, his form shimmering slightly, revealing the golden glow beneath the mortal disguise. "And a brother, of sorts. You need tools, Perseus. You have courage, which is good for dying. You need cunning, which is good for living." He held out his hand. In it lay a sword, but not just any sword. It was the harp, the same adamant sickle he had used to decapitate Argus. It was curved, jagged, and sharper than a razor. "This is not for hacking," Hermes explained, his voice serious now. "Medusa's neck is thick with ancient magic. Iron will shatter. Bronze will bend. This cuts through the curse itself. Take it." Perseus took the weapon. It felt impossibly light, yet balanced perfectly. "But a sword is useless if you cannot see the target," Hermes continued. "And you cannot see her, not with your eyes. You need a mirror. Athena will provide the shield, polished as glass. But you also need speed. You need to be faster than her gaze." He unstrapped one of his own sandals, the talaria, the winged gold. He handed it to Perseus. "Wear this on your left foot," Hermes instructed. "It will make you lighter than air. It will let you hover above the sleeping Gorgons. Do not touch the ground in her lair. The stone floor vibrates with her power. Stay in the air. Strike from above." "And the head?" Perseus asked, his voice shaking. "If I cut it off, it still kills, it still turns to stone." "The kibisis," Hermes said, producing a bag from thin air. It looked like a simple leather pouch, but it was woven from the silver threads of the twilight. "This bag expands to hold anything, and it contains the power within. Once the head is inside, the gaze is neutralized. Do not look at it. Do not let the blood touch you. It is poison and cure, life and death. He sent Perseus on his way, guiding him to the grey air, the three old sisters who shared one eye and one tooth. Hermes did not fight them for Perseus. He whispered the strategy. Steal the eye. Ransom it for the location of the nymphs. Get the helmet of invisibility from Hades. It was a heist, not a battle. And when Perseus finally flew over the stone garden of Medusa's victims, hovering silently on Hermes' sandal, guiding his hand by the reflection in the shield, it was the harp that severed the neck. It was Hermes' logic that won the day. But the Age of Heroes was not just about monsters. It was about the folly of kings. Athamas, king of Boeotia, had gone mad. He was set to sacrifice his own children, Phrixus and Helle, to appease a drought caused by the lies of his new wife, Ino. The altar was built. The knife was sharpened. The children stood weeping, the smoke of the pyre already curling around their ankles. Hermes heard their cry. He was the protector of the young, the guide of the lost. He could not strike down the king directly. Zeus forbade such blatant overturning of mortal will. But he could provide an escape. He went to the high pastures of Olympus, to the sacred flock of cloud sheep. There he found a ram unlike any other. Its fleece was not white wool, but pure, spun gold. It was a creature of solar magic, capable of flight, capable of speech. Go, Hermes whispered into the ram's ear. Fly to the altar. Take the children. Do not stop until you reach the sunrise in the east. Do not let them fall. The golden ram descended like a meteor. It crashed through the sacrificial ceremony, scattering priests and soldiers. It knelt before Phrixus and Helle. Climb, the ram bellowed with a human voice. The children scrambled onto its back. The ram launched itself into the sky, carrying them away from the knife, away from the madness of their father. Hermes watched them go, a streak of gold against the blue. He saw Helle fall, a tragedy he could not prevent, her grip slipping as they crossed the strait that would bear her name, the Hellespont. But Phrixus survived. He reached Colchis. He sacrificed the ram in thanks, hanging the golden fleece in the sacred grove of Ares. Hermes smiled. He had saved the boy, but he had also planted a seed. The golden fleece would become the ultimate prize, the object that would launch 1,000 ships, that would draw Jason and the Argonauts into the greatest adventure of the age. He had not just saved a life. He had created a legend. He had set the stage for the next act of heroism. And then came the greatest of them all, Heracles. The lion-skinned, club-wielding force of nature. The son of Zeus, who suffered under the hatred of Hera more than any other. His labors were a gauntlet of physical impossibility. He strangled lions, wrestled giants, and cleaned stables. But his final labor was different. It was a journey into the dark. Eurystheus demanded Cerberus, the three-headed hound of Hades, the guardian of the underworld. Heracles was strong, but strength means nothing in the land of the dead. You cannot punch a ghost. You cannot wrestle a shadow. He needed a guide. He needed a psychopomp. Hermes met him at the mouth of the cavern at Taenarum. Heracles looked grim, his face set in a mask of determination that bordered on despair. He was a creature of the sun and the earth. The dark dampness of the cave entrance unnerved him. "You cannot walk this path alone, brother," Hermes said, emerging from the gloom. He held the caduceus high, its tip glowing with a pale, spectral light. "I have my club," Heracles grunted, "and my bow." "Useless," Hermes said. "The dead do not bleed. The path is a maze of memory and regret. If you lose your way, you become a shade. You will wander the asphodel meadows until you forget your own name. Follow me." Hermes led him down. The descent was terrifying. The air grew cold and stagnant. They passed the river Acheron, where Charon the ferryman glared at the living intruder. Hermes silenced him with a wave of his wand. "He is with me," Hermes told the boatman. "He pays no coin today." They crossed the Styx. They walked through the fields of mourning. Heracles saw the shades of friends and enemies, reaching out with insubstantial hands. He raised his club to strike them. "Stop!" Hermes commanded, gripping Heracles' massive arm. "They are smoke. If you strike them, you scatter them. But you do not hurt them. You only hurt yourself. Ignore them. Focus on the goal." He guided Heracles past the Furies, past the judges of the dead, straight to the throne of Hades. The king of the underworld sat in silence, Persephone beside him. The air was heavy with the weight of absolute finality. "Uncle," Hermes said, bowing low, "my brother seeks a boon. He asks to borrow your dog." Hades looked at Heracles. He saw the sweat on the hero's brow, the sheer audacity of the request. A smile, rare and cold as a crack in the ice, touched his lips. "He may take Cerberus," Hades said, "if he can subdue him without weapons. No club, no arrows, just his hands." Heracles looked at Hermes. Hermes nodded. "It is the only way. Use your strength, but use it with respect. Do not kill the beast. Wrestle him. Show him you are the Alpha." Hermes watched as Heracles grappled with the monster. It was a titanic struggle, the three heads snapping and barking, the snake tail lashing. But Heracles, guided by Hermes' advice to control the center head, to choke the breath but not the life, prevailed. He dragged the hound to the upper world. Hermes led them back up. The ascent was harder than the descent. The weight of the living world pressed down on them. But they broke the surface. Heracles presented the hound to Eurystheus, who hid in a jar in terror. "Well done," Hermes whispered to Heracles as the hero released the dog to return to the shadows. "You have conquered death. But remember, brother, you can visit, but you cannot stay, not yet." The age ground on. The heroes aged. The monsters fell. But Hermes remained constant. He was the thread that bound the tapestry together. He was there when Oedipus was found on the mountain, ensuring the shepherd gave the baby to the Corinthian rather than leaving it to die. He was there when the 7 against Thebes marched, guiding the messengers through the enemy lines. He was the invisible hand. He did not seek the glory of the kill. He did not want the statues or the temples. He wanted the flow. He wanted the story to continue. He saw humanity not as subjects to be ruled, but as a fascinating, intricate puzzle to be solved. They were fragile, yes, but they were capable of such surprising resilience. And as long as they had the audacity to hope, to steal fire, to trick death, Hermes would be there, whispering the answer in their ear just before the clock ran out. The twilight of the heroes was approaching. The greatest war was on the horizon. A war that would involve all the gods, all the kings, and all the grief of the world. Troy. Hermes looked toward the Scamander plain. He felt the gathering of the fates. He adjusted his chlamys, checked the wings on his sandals, and smiled a smile that was both sad and eager. The game was about to get much, much bigger, and the messenger would be the only one allowed to cross the lines. The golden age of heroes did not end with a whimper. It ended with a scream that tore the throat of the world. It ended on the dusty, wind-scoured plains of Ilium, where the Scamander River ran red with the blood of a generation. And the walls of Troy stood as a defiant, doomed monument to human stubbornness. The war had raged for 9 long years, a stalemate of iron and spear, of petty raids and grand duels, grinding the youth of Greece and Asia Minor into the mud. To the mortal eye, it was a conflict of kings. Agamemnon against Priam, Menelaus against Paris, the achingly human desire for possession masked as honor. But to the eyes of Hermes, watching from the peaks of Mount Ida, or skimming the white caps of the Aegean, it was a celestial civil war, a family feud played out using human pawns. Olympus was fractured. The great banquet table was empty, replaced by war councils and whispered alliances. Hera and Athena, their vanity still stinging from the apple of discord, backed the Achaeans with a terrifying, cold logic. Aphrodite and Ares, creatures of passion and blood, stood with the Trojans. Poseidon shook the earth for the Greeks. Apollo shot his plague arrows for the Trojans. And in the middle sat Zeus, the weary arbiter, weighing the fates in his golden scales, knowing that destiny, the dark, immutable Moirea, demanded the fall of the city. Hermes moved through this chaos with a unique detachment. He favored the Greeks. He was, after all, a son of Zeus and a lover of civilization, of the clever speech and the well-ordered camp. But he did not share the visceral hatred of Hera. He did not want to see Troy burn for the sake of a bruised ego. He admired the Trojans. He admired their piety, their walls, their horses. He had a special affection for the old King Priam, a man of dignity who had fathered 50 sons, only to watch them die one by one. Hermes was the herald. In war, the herald is sacred. He is the one man who can cross the lines without a sword, who carries the truce, the ransom, the message. He was the divine embodiment of that neutrality. While Ares was down in the dust, hacking at bodies and screaming in the ecstasy of slaughter, Hermes floated above, invisible, ensuring that the rules of the cosmos were not entirely forgotten in the madness. But the war was reaching its fever pitch. Patroclus was dead, slain by Hector, and in retaliation, the great beast of the Achaean camp, Achilles, had risen from his sullen grief. His rage was a force of nature, a fire that consumed everything in its path. He had killed Hector. He had tied the noble prince's body to his chariot and dragged it through the dust, defiling the dead, breaking the sacred laws of honorable combat. The gods watched in horror. Even Hera, who hated Hector, felt the wrongness of it. A corpse is not an enemy. It is a husk, belonging to the earth and the memory of the living. To deny it rights was to insult the order of things. On the 12th day of this desecration, Zeus called for Hermes. The king of gods sat on the highest peak of Olympus, looking down at the Achaean ships. His face was thunderous, his patience at an end. "Go," Zeus commanded, his voice rumbling like an earthquake deep underground. "Go to the tent of Achilles. But first, go to Priam. The old king sits in his palace, weeping into his robes. Tell him to go to the ships. Tell him to ransom his son. He must go alone. No army, no guards. Only a single old herald to drive the mule cart." "He will be slaughtered," Hermes said, stating the brutal fact of the war. "Achilles is not a man anymore. He is a wound in the shape of a warrior. He will see the king of Troy, and see only the father of the man who killed his friend." "You will be there," Zeus said, turning his gaze to his son. "You are the wayfinder. You are the opener of gates. Cloak him in mist. Blind the eyes of the myrmidons. Lull the sentries to sleep. Bring the father to the killer, and let grief speak to grief." It was a mission of absolute stealth and diplomacy, the two things Hermes mastered above all else. He bowed, donning his golden sandals. He picked up the caduceus, feeling the hum of its sedative power. This was not a job for the sword. It was a job for the wand. He descended to the Troad. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the battlefield. The air smelled of carrion, of wood smoke from the funeral pyres of the Greeks, and of the salt sea. He flew to the palace of Priam. He did not appear in his glory. That would only terrify the grieving household. He slipped into the mind of the king as a whisper, a sudden, undeniable impulse. Go. Take the ransom. Go to the ships. He watched as the old king, trembling but resolute, ordered the mule cart to be loaded. Great talents of gold, tripods, cauldrons, and fine robes, a king's ransom for a prince's body. The queen, Hecuba, wept and clung to him, screaming that he was walking into the jaws of a lion. But Priam was possessed by the courage of the heartbroken. He climbed into the chariot, his old herald Idaeus driving the mules. They rode out of the Scaean gates as the night fell. The plain was dark, lit only by the distant watchfires of the Greek camp. The silence was heavy, broken only by the creak of the wheels and the distant howl of scavenging dogs. Hermes waited for them at the ford of the river. He shifted his form. The divine radiance vanished. The golden armor dissolved into the simple tunic of a young soldier. He made himself look like a myrmidon, a princeling of Achilles' own tribe, handsome, bearded with the first fuzz of manhood, strong but unthreatening. He walked out of the darkness, standing in the path of the chariot. Priam and Idaeus froze. They saw a Greek warrior blocking their way. This was it. The end. Father, Hermes said, his voice respectful, pitching it to the dialect of the Pythians. Where do you go through the immortal night, while other mortals sleep? Do you not fear the Achaeans who are hard by, hostile and ruthless? If one of them saw you carrying such treasure through the black, swift night, what would you do? You are not young, and this man who attends you is old. You could not fight off a dog, let alone a spearman. Priam looked at the young man. He saw no malice in the face, only a strange, solicitous curiosity. It is as you say, dear child, the king replied, his voice shaking. But some god has held his hand over me, who sent such a wayfarer as you to meet me. You have a good form and a wise mind. Blessed are the parents who bore you. I am a follower of Achilles, Hermes lied, spinning the backstory with the ease of a master playwright. I am one of the Myrmidons. My father is Polyctor, a man rich and old like you. I won the lot to come out on scout duty tonight. But tell me, is that Hector? Is that the body of the prince? Or have the dogs already torn him? He is whole, Priam whispered, tears starting in his eyes. The gods protect him, even in death. He lies fresh as dew, though Achilles drags him every morning. Hermes nodded, a look of solemnity crossing his young face. "Come, old father. I will guide you. I will not hurt you, nor let any other hurt you. You remind me of my own father." He stepped up into the chariot. He took the reins from the shaking hands of Idaeus. And then the magic began. Hermes did not just drive. He manipulated the very fabric of the night. He touched the horses and the mules with an invisible spur of energy, and they found a second wind, moving with a supernatural silence. He cast a glamour over the vehicle, a shroud of darkness that made them blend into the shadows of the plain. They passed patrols of Greek soldiers who looked right at them and saw nothing but the wind moving the grass. They reached the trench and the wall of the Yen camp. The gates were shut. The sentries were at their posts, armed and alert, cooking their supper by the fire. Hermes stopped the chariot. He turned to Priam and placed a finger to his lips. Then he raised the caduceus. He did not strike, he merely waved it over the heads of the guards. The effect was instant. The sentries did not slump over. They simply drifted. Their eyes remained open, but their minds detached from the present moment. They were awake, but they were seeing dreams. They saw the fire, they saw the wall, but they did not see the mule cart, the old king, or the young god. They were trapped in a bubble of perception where nothing was happening. Hermes leapt down. He walked to the great wooden crossbar that held the gates, a beam so heavy that it took 3 ordinary men to lift it. Hermes lifted it with one hand, sliding it back as if it were a twig. The gates groaned open, but the sound was swallowed by the wind. He drove them through. He drove them deep into the camp, past the rows of black ships, past the sleeping warriors, straight to the high enclosure of Achilles. The lodge of the hero was a fortress in itself, built of pine planks and thatched with reeds. The door was barred by a single fir pole that required 3 myrmidons to bolt home. Achilles sat inside, brooding, eating his meal in silence, attended by his friends Automedon and Alcimus. Hermes stopped the chariot at the door. He turned to Priam. The disguise was no longer necessary. The journey was done. The impossible had been achieved. "Old man," Hermes said, and his voice changed. It was no longer the voice of the young Myrmidon. It was the voice of the wind, the voice of the stars, the voice that had spoken to the tortoise in the cave. "I am not the son of Polyctor. I am an immortal god. I am Hermes. My father, Zeus, sent me to guide you." Priam gasped, falling to his knees in the chariot. He looked up, and for a fleeting second he saw the true form, the golden aura, the winged sandals fluttering with divine energy. "I will not go in with you," Hermes said gently. "It would be shameful for a deathless god to be entertained openly by mortals in such grief. This is a human moment, Priam. You must do this alone. Go in, clasp his knees, invoke his father, his mother, and his child. Touch his heart. He stepped down from the chariot and vanished, dissolving into the night air like mist clearing under the moon. But he did not leave. He hovered above the lodge, watching the silent guardian. He saw Priam enter the room unseen. He saw the old king kneel. He saw the shock on Achilles' face as Priam, the king of Troy, the enemy, kissed the terrible man-slaughtering hands that had killed so many of his sons. Think of your father, O Achilles, like to the gods, Priam wept. He is old like me. He waits for you. But I have no one left. I have kissed the hand of the man who killed my son. Hermes watched from the rafters, invisible. He felt the tension in the room, thick as a bowstring drawn to its limit. Achilles' face contorted. The rage, the iron mask he had worn since Patroclus died, cracked. He looked at the old man and saw his own father, Peleus. He saw his own mortality. Achilles wept. The two men, the killer and the father, wept together in the lodge, their grief mingling, dissolving the hatred of the war for one brief, transcendent hour. It was a victory not of arms, but of humanity. And Hermes, the god of exchanges, knew this was the greatest trade of the war. Wrath for pity. Achilles granted the ransom. He granted the body. He even granted a truce of 11 days for the funeral rites. He ordered the body of Hector to be washed and anointed by his serving women, so that Priam would not see the wounds and cry out in anger, reigniting the violence. The night wore on. Priam slept in the porch of the lodge, exhausted by his grief and his journey. But Hermes did not sleep. He knew the danger was not over. They were still in the heart of the enemy camp. If Agamemnon found them, there would be no mercy. Before the dawn could fully break, while the morning star was just beginning to bleach the eastern sky, Hermes descended again. He stood at the head of the sleeping king. "Old man," Hermes whispered into Priam's dream, "you sleep too soundly in the house of your foe. Achilles has spared you. But Agamemnon knows nothing of this. If he finds you, the ransom for your life will be 3 times what you paid for your son. Wake up. We must go." Priam woke with a start. He saw the god standing there, urgent and radiant. He roused the herald. Hermes yoked the mules and the horses himself. He did not speak. He drove them out of the camp with the same supernatural stealth, guiding them through the sleeping army of the Greeks. The sentries were still dozing, the spell holding fast. They crossed the trench, crossed the river, and reached the open plain. As the sun began to rise, turning the sky to saffron and gold, Hermes stopped the chariot near the river Xanthus. The safety of Troy was visible in the distance. "I leave you here," Hermes said. "Go to your city. Mourn your son. You have done what no other man has done." He did not wait for thanks. He shot into the sky, ascending toward Olympus. He looked down and saw the chariot moving slowly toward the gates. He saw Cassandra, the prophetess, standing on the ramparts, the first to see her father returning with the body of her brother. He heard her scream, a sound of pure agony that woke the city. Hermes felt a strange heaviness in his chest. He knew the future. He knew that this truce was only a pause. He knew that Achilles would die, shot by Paris with the help of Apollo. He knew that Priam would be slaughtered on his own altar by Achilles' son. He knew that Troy would burn, that the walls would fall, and that the smoke would rise to the indifference of the stars. But for tonight, he had saved something. He had saved the dignity of a father. He had allowed a moment of grace in a world of slaughter. He was the messenger, and he had delivered the message that even in the deepest pit of war, there is a common language of loss. He returned to Olympus, washing the dust of the mortal plane from his feet. The other gods were stirring, preparing for the next move in the great game. Hermes took his place among them, silent and enigmatic. He had walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and he had brought the old king back. It was enough. The war would continue, the heroes would fall, but the thief of the first dawn had stolen a moment of peace from the jaws of fate. The funeral fires of Hector would burn for 9 days, and Hermes would watch over the smoke, ensuring it rose straight and true, a final offering from a city that was already a ghost. The fires of Troy were long cold, the smoke of the burning city scattered by 10 years of wind. But the consequences of that war still rippled across the Mediterranean like the aftershocks of an earthquake. The heroes who had survived the slaughter were scattered. Agamemnon murdered in his bath, Menelaus blown to Egypt, Nestor growing old in Pylos. But one man remained unaccounted for. One man, the craftiest of them all, the favorite of Athena and the spiritual kin of Hermes, was still lost. Odysseus, the man of many turns, the man who had blinded the Cyclops, tricked the sirens, and walked into the underworld and back. He was not dead. He was worse. He was stuck. Hermes knew exactly where he was. He was on the island of Ogygia, the navel of the sea, trapped in the loving, suffocating embrace of the nymph Calypso. For 7 years, the hero had sat on the rocky shore, weeping as he looked toward Ithaca, his heart breaking for the smoke of his own hearth. Calypso, beautiful and ageless, offered him immortality, eternal youth, and a bed shared with a goddess. Most men would call this paradise. Odysseus called it a prison. Athena, ever the advocate for her champion, had finally swayed the council of Olympus, Zeus, in his wisdom, decreed that the exile must end. He turned to his son, the only one who could bridge the gap between the divine decree and the stubborn will of a nymph. "Hermes," Zeus said, his voice echoing in the golden hall. "You are the messenger. You are the one who makes the impossible happen. Go to the island. Tell the nymph with the lovely braids that the man must go. He will have no ships, no companions. He will sail on a raft, alone, suffering, until he reaches the Phaeacians. But he will go." Hermes nodded. He rose from his seat, binding on his beautiful sandals, the ambrosial, golden ones that carried him over the wet sea and the boundless earth with the breath of the wind. He took the wand with which he lulls the eyes of men to sleep. He launched himself from the peaks of Pieria, swooping down onto the sea like a shearwater, a bird that hunts fish in the dangerous troughs of the waves. Wetting its thick plumage in the brine, he skimmed the violet water until he reached the distant island. He stepped onto the shore, and the air changed. Ogygia was not of this world. It was a sensory overload of beauty. A great fire blazed on the hearth, and the smell of cedar and citrus wood burning spread through the island. Calypso was inside her cave, singing with a sweet voice as she went to and fro at her loom, weaving with a golden shuttle. Around the cave grew a luxuriant wood, alder and poplar, and sweet-smelling cypress. Vines loaded with clusters of grapes trailed around the mouth of the cavern. 4 fountains of white water gushed in a row, close to one another, but turned in different directions. Soft meadows of violet and parsley bloomed on every side. It was a trap of comfort, a cage of perfection. Hermes stood at the entrance, immune to the seduction. He was a god of roads, of movement, stagnation. Even beautiful stagnation was anathema to him. Calypso saw him. She knew him at once, for gods are not unknown to one another, even if they live apart, and a flicker of fear crossed her face. She rose, offering him the hospitality due to a guest. She set a table with ambrosia and mixed the ruddy nectar. Hermes ate and drank, his eyes scanning the cave. Odysseus was not there. He was on the shore, weeping. "Tell me, Hermes of the golden wand," Calypso asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why have you come? You do not often visit." "I did not wish to come," Hermes said bluntly, wiping the nectar from his lips. "Who would willingly cross such a vast expanse of salt water? But the will of Zeus is the will of Zeus. No god can evade it." He looked at her, his expression softening, but his message remaining iron. "You have a man here, the most unlucky man of all those who fought at Troy. You have kept him for 7 years, but now the Father orders you to send him back. It is not his destiny to die here, away from his friends. He is meant to see his high-roofed house and his native land." Calypso shuddered. Her beautiful face twisted in anger. "You gods are cruel," she cried. "You are jealous. You sleep with mortal women whenever you please. But let a goddess take a mortal man, a man I saved from the sea, a man I love, and you strike him down." "Anger changes nothing," Hermes said calmly. "The order stands. Send him away, or face the wrath of Zeus, and give him the tools to build a raft. Do not make it hard for him." He left her then. He did not go to Odysseus. The hero did not need to see the machinery of his liberation. He only needed the result. Hermes flew back into the sky, leaving the nymph to her grief, and the hero to his hope. But the journey of Odysseus was not over. The sea was still full of monsters. Months later, after the raft was shattered by Poseidon, after the Phaeacians returned him to Ithaca, after the massacre of the suitors, there was another island, another witch, Circe. The timeline of the gods is fluid, and Hermes found himself revisiting the memories of the Odyssey, not in sequence, but in importance. He recalled the moment on Air, the island of the dread goddess who turned men into swine. Odysseus's men were already grunting in the pigsty, their minds human, but their bodies bristling with bristles. Odysseus was marching through the woods to save them, ignorant of the danger. Hermes could not let the hero fall. Not to magic, not to a potion. He appeared to Odysseus in the glade. He looked like a young man, a prince in the first bloom of manhood. He reached out and took Odysseus's hand. "Where are you going, unlucky one?" Hermes asked, his eyes dancing with secret knowledge. "Alone through the hills, ignorant of the land? Your friends are penned in Circe's house like pigs. Do you think you can free them? You will not return yourself. You will stay there with the others." Odysseus drew his sword, suspicion in his eyes. "Who are you to tell me my fate?" "I am the one who can save you," Hermes said. He reached down to the earth. "Here, take this herb. It is a medicine of great virtue. The gods call it mole. Its root is black, but its flower is white as milk. It is hard for mortal men to dig, but the gods can do all things." He pulled the plant from the ground. The root screamed silently as it left the soil. He handed it to Odysseus. "When Circe gives you the cup, the drugged wine that steals the mind, put this in it. The mole will neutralize the magic. She will strike you with her wand, expecting you to change. But you will not change. Then draw your sword and rush at her as if to kill her. She will be terrified. She will ask you to her bed. Do not refuse her, for you need her help to get home. But make her swear the great oath of the immortals first. Make her swear she will not unman you when you are naked." Odysseus took the herb. He looked at the young man, realizing who stood before him. "Hermes," he whispered. "Go," Hermes said, smiling. "And when you trick the trickster, remember who taught you." He vanished into the woods, the smell of the moly lingering in the air. And finally, the end of the journey, the end of the Odyssey. The suitors lay dead in the hall of Ithaca. 100 young men, the flower of the islands, slaughtered by Odysseus and his son Telemachus. Their blood soaked the floor. Their souls, bewildered and angry, rose from their bodies like smoke. They were not heroes. They were not warriors who died in battle. They were gluttons who died at a feast. Hermes appeared in the hall. He was not the young prince now. He was the Psychopomp, the guide of souls. He held the golden wand not to put them to sleep, but to wake them to their new reality. He waved the wand. The souls gathered. They made a sound like bats, a high, gibbering squeak. They fluttered in the corners of the room, terrified of the dark journey ahead. "Come," Hermes commanded, his voice echoing in the spiritual realm, unheard by the living Odysseus, who was cleaning the hall. "The feast is over. The bill is paid." He led them out. He led them past the streams of Oceanus and the White Rock, past the gates of the sun and the land of dreams. They reached the asphodel meadows, where the spirits of the dead dwell, phantoms of men outworn. Hermes walked at the head of the procession, the golden wand glowing in the eternal twilight. The souls chattered behind him, complaining of their fate, blaming the beggar, blaming the bow, blaming the women. Hermes did not listen. He had heard it all before. The dead always had excuses. He brought them to the meadow and left them there. He saw the shade of Agamemnon approach, weeping as he recognized the suitors. He saw the shade of Achilles, still majestic in his gloom. Hermes watched the reunion of the ghosts. He felt a strange pang of, not pity, but completion. He had been there at the beginning, when the oath of Tyndareus bound these men to the war. He had been there at the end, guiding the souls of the consequences. He turned away from the underworld, ascending back to the light. The Odyssey was done. The hero was home. The balance was restored. But as he flew over the sea, he looked down at Ithaca one last time. He saw Odysseus standing by the olive tree, his wife Penelope in his arms. The man of many turns had finally stopped turning. Hermes smiled. He had done his job. He was the god of boundaries, and he had helped a man cross the ultimate boundary, the one between being lost and being found. He did not land on Olympus immediately. He drifted on the wind, letting the currents of the air carry him. He thought of his son Pan, playing pipes in the hills. He thought of his mother Maya in the cave. He thought of the tortoise he had killed to make a song. The world was changing. The age of direct intervention was fading. Men were beginning to write their own laws, sail their own ships without praying to the winds. The gods were becoming distant. Stories, metaphors. But Hermes did not fear the change. He was the god of change. He was the god of the market, the crossroads, the sudden insight. As long as men traveled, as long as they traded, as long as they lied and stole and loved and invented, he would be there. He looked at the horizon, where the son of Apollo was setting in a blaze of glory. "Play on, brother," Hermes whispered to the wind. "I have miles to go before I sleep." He turned north, toward the unknown lands, toward new myths, toward the future. The wayfinder was never lost, for everywhere he went was a road. The world was growing old, not in the way a man grows old, with the graying of hair and the stooping of the spine, but in the way a mountain grows old, by being worn down, grain by grain, under the relentless friction of time and wind. The sharp, jagged edges of the mythic age were being smoothed over. The monsters that had once roamed the dark forests of Nemea and the swamps of Lerna were gone, hunted to extinction by the sons of Heracles. The great centaurs had retreated to the highest, most inaccessible peaks, their hoofbeats no longer thundering on the plains of Thessaly. Even the nymphs, the spirits of the trees and the springs, seemed to withdraw deeper into the bark and the bedrock, their voices becoming indistinguishable from the rustle of leaves and the babble of brooks. Hermes felt the change in the texture of the air. The ether, that pure, golden substance that the gods breathed, was thinning. It was being replaced by the heavy, industrial smoke of human endeavor. Men were no longer looking up at the clouds to find the faces of the Olympians. They were looking down at the earth, measuring it, plowing it, building walls of stone and laws of logic. The age of direct intervention was ending. The age of the miracle was fading into the age of the memory. Zeus sat on his throne, but he was distant, his eyes fixed on the horizon of history, watching the rise of iron empires that knew him only as a name to be stamped on a coin. Apollo's oracles at Delphi were beginning to speak in riddles that were more politics than prophecy. The divine family was drifting apart, retreating into their own archetypes. But Hermes did not retreat. He was the god of the boundary, and a boundary is not a place, it is a transition. He thrived in the twilight. As the lights of Olympus dimmed, the work of the Psychopomp became heavier, more profound. The dead were dying in greater numbers now, not heroes slain by glorious spears, but men dying of fever, of old age, of the grinding toil of civilization. They needed a guide who understood the quiet dignity of the ordinary end, and it was in this twilight era that the greatest tragedy of the ancient world unfolded. A tragedy that would define Hermes' role for eternity. It was the story of the singer who tried to conquer death, not with a sword, but with a song. Orpheus. He was a son of the muse Calliope, and some whispered of Apollo himself. He possessed the lyre, the very instrument Hermes had invented in the cave of Cyllene, but he played it with a sorrow that Hermes had never known. Hermes played for wit, for joy, for the sheer trick of existence. Orpheus played for the soul. He played the music of loss before he had even lost anything. When Eurydice died, bitten by a viper while fleeing the unwanted advances of Aristeus, the grief of Orpheus was not a human emotion. It was a cataclysm. He did not weep. He sang. He sang a dirge so heavy that the birds fell from the sky, forgetting how to fly. The rivers stopped their courses, the water refusing to flow toward a sea that could contain such sadness. Hermes was there when Orpheus made the decision. The singer did not go to the temples to pray. He went to the cave at Taenarum, the same mouth of hell that Heracles had entered. But Orpheus wore no armor. He carried no club. He held only the tortoise-shell lyre against his chest. "He is mad," Charon the ferryman grumbled, as Orpheus approached the black waters of the Styx. "The living have no place here. Go back, singer. The coin is only for the cold." But Orpheus did not argue. He touched the strings. The sound that rose over the stagnant water was a bridge of pure longing. It was a sound that remembered every sunset, every lover's touch, every moment of fleeting beauty that the dead had left behind. Charon, the ancient, rot-hearted boatman, wept tears of black ichor. He poled the skiff across the water without a word, without a fee. Hermes, invisible in the shadows of the boat, watched with a deep, abiding respect. He had seen Heracles choke the life out of monsters. He had seen Achilles slaughter armies. But this was power. This was the manipulation of reality through art. Orpheus was rewriting the laws of the underworld with a melody. They walked through the asphodel meadows. The shades of the dead, usually drifting aimlessly like blown leaves, stopped. They gathered around the singer, thousands of them. Their pale faces turned toward the music like flowers seeking a sun that no longer existed. They reached the palace of Hades and Persephone. The king and queen of the dead sat on thrones of obsidian, their faces set in the rigor mortis of eternal judgment. The Furies, Tisiphone, Alecto, and Megaera, sat at the foot of the throne, their hair of writhing snakes hissing in the silence. Orpheus stood before them. He did not bow. He began to play. He sang of the love of Hades for Persephone. He sang of the rape of the spring, of the pomegranate seeds, of the cycle of loss and return. He reminded the dark god that he, too, had once been a lover who would tear the earth apart to be with his desire. He sang of the brevity of life, of how death is the final creditor who will eventually claim everyone. So why act with haste? Why take the bloom before it has faded? The effect was absolute. The wheel of Ixion, which had spun for eternity in a blur of fire and agony, ground to a halt. The vulture that tore at the liver of Tityos stopped its feeding and listened. Tantalus, standing in the pool of water he could never drink, forgot his thirst. The stone of Sisyphus sat motionless at the bottom of the hill. And for the first and only time in the history of the cosmos, the Furies wept. Their iron cheeks were wet with tears. The snakes in their hair went limp, lulled by the sorrow of the song. Hades leaned forward. The coldness of his eyes had melted. Persephone was openly weeping, her hand gripping her husband's arm. "Stop," Hades whispered. The silence that followed the music was deafening. "You have broken the law of silence. You have made the dead remember life too vividly. It is cruel, and it is beautiful." "Give her back," Orpheus said, his voice raw. "I do not ask for immortality. I ask for the rest of her years. When she is old, we will both return to you. We belong to you in the end. Just not yet." Hades looked at Persephone. She nodded. "Take her," Hades commanded. A collective sigh went through the gathered ghosts, but Hades raised a hand. "But there is a condition. The law of the underworld cannot be wholly broken, only bent. You will lead her out. Hermes will guide you. She will follow Orpheus, and Hermes will follow her. But you, Orpheus, you must not look back. Not once. You must trust that she is there. You must walk through the shadows, through the doubt, through the silence. If you turn your head before the sunlight hits her face, she returns to me forever." Orpheus nodded. He turned his back on the throne. Hermes stepped out of the shadows. He was solemn, his caduceus held low. He went to a side chamber where the newly dead waited. He found Eurydice. She was still limp, the poison of the viper in her veins, her step slow and uncertain. She did not speak. The dead do not speak easily until they have drunk of the blood or the water of memory. "Come, daughter," Hermes whispered. "Your husband has brought you with a song." The procession began. It was a journey of miles, ascending through the crushing geological weight of the earth. The path was steep, dark, and thick with a mist that smelled of sulfur and old dust. Orpheus walked in front. He walked with a desperate, frantic energy, his knuckles white as he clutched his lyre. He wanted to run, but he forced himself to walk, measuring his pace. Behind him, limping, came Eurydice, and behind her, the silent shepherd, came Hermes. The silence was the enemy. In the court of Hades, the music had connected them. Here, in the tunnel, there was no music. There was only the sound of Orpheus's sandals scraping on the stone. Eurydice, being a shade, made no sound. Her feet did not disturb the dust. Hermes watched the back of Orpheus's head. He saw the tension in the neck muscles. He heard the ragged breathing. He knew what the mortal was thinking. Is she there? Is this a trick of the gods? Is Hades laughing at me? Why can't I hear her? Every step was a battle against paranoia. The darkness pressed in, whispering doubts. She isn't there. You are walking alone. You are a fool. They climbed for hours. The air began to change. It grew thinner, less oppressive. A faint grey light began to filter down from above, the first hint of the upper world. They were close. They were so incredibly close. Orpheus saw the light. He saw the mouth of the cave ahead, framing a patch of twilight scatter. The relief that washed over him was catastrophic. It was too much. In his joy, in his overwhelming need to share the moment of salvation with his beloved, his discipline shattered. He forgot. For one heartbeat, he forgot the condition. He was not a hero. He was a lover. And a lover looks at the beloved. Orpheus stopped. He turned. Eurydice, look! The sun! He saw her. She was there, standing in the gloom, her face pale and beautiful, her eyes wide with the sudden realization of what he had done. Hermes saw the turn. He felt the snap of the cosmic law. It was a physical vibration, a rubber band breaking. Orpheus! Hermes cried out. But it was too late. The darkness of the tunnel surged forward like a tidal wave. It grabbed Eurydice. She did not scream. She simply began to recede, pulled backward by an invisible, irresistible gravity. Farewell, she whispered. A faint, ghostly sound. Farewell. Orpheus lunged for her. He threw his arms out, desperate to catch her hand, to hold her, to drag her into the light by force. But his fingers closed on empty air. He grasped nothing but smoke. She was gone. Hermes stood there, the barrier between them. He did not look angry. He looked infinitely sad. He placed a hand on Orpheus's chest, stopping him from running back down into the dark. It is done, Hermes said softly. You killed her. No! Orpheus screamed, falling to his knees, clawing at the rocky floor. Let me go back. I will sing again. I will charm him again. You cannot step in the same river twice, Hermes said, and you cannot cross the Styx twice while breathing. Charon will not row you. The dog will not let you pass. You looked back, Orpheus. You looked at death, and death looked back at you. Hermes turned to the darkness where Eurydice had vanished. He raised his wand in a silent salute. He was the Psychopomp. He would guide her back to the asphodel meadows. He would ensure she was comfortable, but he could not bring her back. The contract was void. He left Orpheus there, weeping in the twilight, a broken man who would wander the wild places of Thrace until the Maenads tore him apart in their frenzy, sending his head floating down the Hebrus River, still singing, still calling her name. Hermes ascended to the peak of the mountain. He sat on a rock, looking out over the world. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. The tragedy of Orpheus was the turning point. It marked the end of the hope that humanity could cheat the fundamental laws of existence through art or heroism. Death was absolute. The gods could delay it. They could sweeten it, but they could not reverse it. And as the centuries rolled on, the silence grew. The temples of Zeus crumbled, the marble columns toppling into the grass to be covered by ivy. The fires on the altars of Apollo sputtered and died. The great statues of Athena were pulled down by barbarians who knew nothing of the grey-eyed goddess. The names of the gods became myths, then stories for children, then subjects for scholars. But Hermes did not die. The other gods were tied to places, to the mountain, to the sea, to the specific city-state. When the city fell, the god faded. But Hermes was the god of the road, and the road never ends. He was the god of the word, and words travel. He changed. He evolved. He shed the chlamys and the sandals and put on the robes of the scholar, the alchemist, the magician. He traveled south to the ancient sands of Egypt. There, in the libraries of Alexandria, he met his other self, Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing. They merged. The Greek quicksilver and the Egyptian granite fused to become something new. Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice-great Hermes. He ceased to be a character in a story and became a principle of the universe. He became the patron of the hidden knowledge, the hermetic arts. He hid in the ink of the manuscripts that whispered of turning lead into gold, not the physical gold of the earth, but the spiritual gold of the enlightened soul. He became the voice in the head of the astronomer looking at the stars, the intuition of the doctor mixing a cure, the sudden luck of the merchant closing a deal. He was no longer the thief of cattle. He was the thief of ignorance. The world became modern. Iron turned to steel. Steam turned to electricity. The night was banished by artificial lights. The mystery was dissected by microscopes. But in the quiet moments, in the spaces between the noise, Hermes remained. He stood on the rooftop of a skyscraper in a sprawling metropolis, invisible to the millions of souls rushing below. He wore no toga now. He looked like a man in a grey suit, or a courier on a bicycle weaving through traffic, or a graffiti artist painting a wing on a subway wall. He was the glitch in the computer system. He was the lost letter that arrives 20 years late. He was the sudden realization that changes a life. He looked down at the humanity he had shepherded for eons. They were still the same. They still loved, they still lied, they still stole, and they still feared the dark. They still needed a guide. Hermes smiled. It was the same smile he had worn in the cave of Maya, the smile of the trickster who knows the game is never really over. "I am the messenger," he whispered to the wind, his voice carrying the echoes of 10,000 years. "I am the space between the atoms. I am the silence between the notes of the lyre. I am the one who waits at the crossroads when you do not know which way to turn." He looked at the shoes on his feet. They were not golden sandals anymore, but they still felt light. He tapped his heel against the concrete. "The Olympians are gone," he said. "The halls are empty. The ambrosia is dry, but I am still working. Am the Psychopomp. And as long as there is a journey to be made, from the womb to the world, or from the world to the dark, I will be there." He adjusted his hat, a fedora, a helmet, a petasos, it didn't matter, and stepped off the edge of the roof. He did not fall. He drifted, caught by the updraft of the city, a spark of divine intelligence riding the currents of the modern age. The saga of Hermes was not a circle. It was a spiral. It never ended. It only moved to a higher octave. The thief, the shepherd, the herald, the guide. He was all of them, and he was none of them. He was the movement itself. And somewhere, in the noise of the traffic and the hum of the wires, if you listened closely, you could still hear it, the faint, rhythmic strumming of a tortoise-shell lyre, playing a song that never ends, for the god who never sleeps. Sleep well.